Since 1976, the U.S. has recognized Black History Month in February to commemorate the achievements of people with African heritage and important events in their collective past. Much attention is given to people like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and Barack Obama, so we've chosen to focus on a member of our community, Jared Brodie. Jared is currently a first-year U.S. teaching assistant living and working in the Austrian province of Vorarlberg. We sat down with him to talk about his experience as a USTA and to hear his thoughts on diversity in Austria and the U.S.
Yeah, I think it hasn't been too hard to adapt. As you mentioned, Chicago is a very big city, lots of things to do, but I think once you look past the, I guess, main attractions, like you, for example, they have, a lot of major sports teams there. They have a basketball team, football team, but those aren't things you do on an everyday basis. And so I think once you look past these big things, I think that people really make the place where you live. And so I think if you find a nice group of people, which I have the other like USTAs and other people in the area, then I think any place becomes easier to adapt to. And so it hasn't been too hard, but I think that's mostly because of the people that I've met and the things we've been able to do together. I think in Vienna, it's an international city, or at least the bigger cities as well. I think more people there know English well, and so I think there's a tendency when if you make one mistake in German, immediately they look at you, they see, okay, you don't look like you're Austrian or German, or that German is your first language, and so they immediately switch to English. And so I wanted to come here because I feel like here you have to speak German, and everyone expects you to know German because not many people move here. And so yeah, that was the main, I guess, my main motivation for coming here. And I think I've heard about the dialect and how it can be tricky, but I think sometimes in order to like truly improve or do something well, you sort of have to jump in the deep end and, hope for the best. And so I guess I hoped or desired to go to a place where maybe slightly harder for me at the beginning, but it would pay off, better dividends at the end. Yeah, I think it's hard to say exactly. Like, I think it's slightly less diverse, but it could just be because it's a lot smaller. And so I think like the city where I'm from, if you take like the city that I'm from and the surrounding areas, it's like bigger than the whole province. And so I think there I feel like there's more diversity, but that just could be just because there's more people, and so I see more people of different backgrounds. And so I don't think it's probably slightly less diverse than places where I've grown up, places where I've lived, but I do think it's nice to see people from different backgrounds when you're walking in the street or in a grocery store. Yeah, I think it's defined a little bit differently. I think people in Austria, they have more of a connection with their like ancestry origins, and so I think many people here are either maybe first or second generation immigrants to Austria, and so they still have that connection with wherever they came from. And I think in the U.S., for many people, it's been many years since their parents came to the U.S. or their grandparents came to the U.S., and so they don't have that strong of connection with where they come from and their exact ancestry. And so to that extent, I think diversity is defined differently in Austria because I think people here, you know, they they may be Austrian or they may live in Austria, but they don't necessarily consider themselves to be Austrian, or they have still strong connection with where their ancestry comes from. As a USTA, it hasn't had any impact. As someone in Austria, it's hard to tell to a certain extent. Like, I think no one's ever said anything like outright or direct to me that's been, racist or discriminating, or maybe they have and I just didn't understand what they meant. But I do think that sometimes, at least not just for me, but for other like immigrants here or people who aren't, traditional like Austrians, I think there's the feeling that some people who were born here, they're especially the older people, aren't like racist or discriminatory, but they're like looking for not looking for a mistake, but when you make a mistake, it I think it goes across their mind that okay, they're this, he's black, he's Turkish, so that's the reason why that mistake happened, or I shouldn't have expected anything else. And so that's not something I can prove that I can scientifically say that that's the case, but I do get that feeling that when someone who's of a different culture, of a different ancestry makes that mistake, their ancestry is used to as a blaming tool for that mistake. Yeah, I think the biggest expectation I had was that this program was a cultural exchange, and so I come here and teach, everyone about, or teach the students I have about America, and that's definitely been the case. I definitely taught them a lot of things, but I've also been, happily surprised and happily just glad about the things that the Austrian students here have taught me about Austria, and so I think it's definitely a mutual our relationship. I've taught them things, but they've taught me so many things that I didn't know. And I think I studied, German in high school and college, but I think in those areas, Austria is not really focused. Everything's primarily focused on what's happened in Germany, different things in Germany. And so I think it's been nice to come here and to discover, Austria, something I really didn't have an opinion on before, but through the conversations with students, I've had a greater appreciation of the land of the country, but also of its people and the different things here that you can do and see. Yeah, I think it's hard to pinpoint an exact experience, but I think just the overall relationships that I can build with the different students, I think that's the biggest thing that I've taken away from this experience so far. And I think it's always so nice to, see a student, know their name, and then you can have a nice dialogue between the two. And so I think that's the most rewarding experience for me, just building these relationships that hopefully will last beyond my time here. But I also think a slightly less nuanced answer, but when students sometimes they'll say things that just surprise me or things that I don't expect. Like I don't expect them to know this certain word or expect them to ask a certain question. And so it always makes you laugh because it's just so unexpected. And so that's definitely, a bright spot of interacting with students on a daily basis. So far, I haven't incorporated it. This past week was the semester break, and the week before that, the teachers already had their lessons or the things they want me to talk about. And so hopefully, the upcoming 2 weeks left in the month, I can incorporate it. And I guess my ideal way to incorporate it would be from a perspective of empowerment or an perspective of greatness. I think a lot of times when you hear about like Black history, it's always from a traumatic or negative perspective, but I think there's so much more to it. And so hopefully, I can find ways to incorporate Black history as something that shows a history of people who have done amazing things, not just the people who are just affected by trauma and can only do things because of trauma that they may have experienced. Yeah, I think the biggest piece of advice that I would give is just to enjoy the time you're here. I think it's easy when you only work 13 hours a week to become slightly lazy, slightly comfortable with going to work, and just go home and watch TV. But I would strongly suggest, or strongly recommend to seek out new experiences. The time goes by super quickly. I feel like I just got here, and then now the program's already halfway over, and so I would just recommend to enjoy your time here, seek out new experiences, do things that are out of your comfort zone, and I think if you do those things, you'll have a good time.